Scott Ratterree. He's going to speak to us on performance matrix. Scott is a Michigan Department of Transportation's manager for fleet administration and operations and has been with MDOT since 2008. Prior to coming to MDOT, Scott had more than 28 years of experience in the corporate and federal government arenas, an extensive background in logistics and directing both daily operations and strategic initiatives in the areas of fleet, project, program, and maintenance management.
Okay, today I just want to give you an update of where we've come since last June when we were in Ohio for the national conference. Okay, there's several items on the agenda today that we're going to cover. First is we did have an action item from last year's national conference about additional metrics, so that'll be one of the new focuses. A lot of the other stuff we're going to cover is kind of going to be an update recap of what we've talked about before. And then toward the end, Brad Maupin from South Dakota DOT is going to come up and give kind of a testimonial on what metrics has meant and done for their department. And then at the end, we have time for questions or whatever. We will entertain those as well. So I'm going to give you the historical recap, which is a lot of information in 3 slides, but this initiative started back in Pittsburgh in October of 2010 when the Northeast and Midwest got together, and Michigan stepped up and decided that we'd take on kind of leading the effort to develop fleet performance metrics. And then the following summer, we went to Kansas City, where we had a good interaction between the Northeast and Midwest, and that's where we decided on what 4 metrics we would start off with that are kind of key to what we do in fleet. And then when we went to Alabama the following summer for the national conference, we kind of got buy-in from the 40 states that were there on the 4 metrics. And then that following fall, Subcommittee on Maintenance and Subcommittee on Highways actually approved resolutions for those four measurements. And then the following spring, in May of 13, the website, we worked with NCPP and got the website set up. They did a fantastic job with that to where we could post all the measurements. That became operational. And then we asked folks to start reporting that July. So then you jump ahead to Orlando, Florida in June of 14, and we already had 17 states reporting at that point, and we had several action items from that meeting. One was that we wanted to double that participation effort by the national conference in 2016, and we'll talk a little bit about that more lately. Everything on this slide that's in the green is what has happened since last summer. We annually do an update, usually via webinar with SCOM on the performance measurements. We had 2 M5 webinars, which is our fleet management system, that we interacted with other folks that have that system to kind of benchmark best practices. And then we had 4 metrics team webinars to talk about what additional metric we would be pursuing. So that was out of last year's Ohio conference. That was the goal, and the objective was to recommend an additional metric or metrics to move ahead on, because we did have quite a few states that were interested in pursuing other measurements, even though there's other states that have not yet reported, which is fine. It just was an opportunity to get the group back together and talk about that. So we ended up with 3 action items from last year. One was to form a team to identify what the additional measurements would be. And you can see from the first item up there was 2 representatives from each region that participated in the conference calls. And then the other goal was to identify and select future metrics to report. So that was really the goal of the committee. And then as part of that committee, we had an action item to reach out to the other DOTs to get suggestions for what they thought would be good measurements. So all that information there is basically the background on what the team's charter was this past year. So we had to come up with a way to develop and review the measurement that we were going to suggest. So everything in the green has been done to this point. The team did identify a new measurement. We developed a definition for that measurement and a way to assess or report that measurement. And we compiled an issue paper, which shortly Scott We'll pass out a copy to everybody. I think we may have copies for everybody in the room, if not at least one per state, to let you take a look at it. And then the team looked at it as a whole, and we kind of endorsed it. And where we're at now is to share and discuss with all state DOTs. So I've asked the Southeast and the West to discuss it at their conference, and obviously I'm here to discuss it at this conference. And then what we want to do is work on another draft resolution to add this to the other 4 measurements like we did before for Subcommittee of Maintenance, Subcommittee of Highways, and then we'll include it as part of the reporting sometime next year, assuming, you know, we all don't have heartburn with it. So what we did first was we looked at previous surveys that had been done over the years since we started doing this, or pursuing this back in 2010, 2011. And you can see from this listing here, these were some of the measurements that have been recommended over the years through various surveys. And I won't go down and try to explain each one. Some of them may mean different things to different people, but we can certainly talk about that at some point if you have questions. So what we ended up with, the team ended up with 5 to choose from when it all was said and done. And this was based upon the surveys and DOT inputs we got. And the team recommended that we pursue kind of a, I'll call it a lead measurement for PM compliance, because PM compliance is such a big part of what we do to maintain our fleets. And that measurement would be percentage of scheduled versus unscheduled maintenance work orders, with the theory behind that being that, you know, if you're performing your scheduled maintenance and you're doing it correctly and you're inspecting the right things and you're keeping up with that, that theoretically that should reduce your unscheduled maintenance, those unplanned emergency breakdowns that you have on the highway. So the team thought that was pretty good. I think Bob, if he was here, would tell you that they've been reporting that in Minnesota for quite some time, and that's been pretty effective tool for them to manage their PM. So it's kind of a leading indicator versus a lagging indicator, if you're familiar with those terms. So the definition of it, or how we would measure it, it'd be based upon the total work orders that are coded as scheduled versus unscheduled maintenance repairs in your fleet management system, or however you track that. Not only was it a DOT recommendation based upon what the team discussed, but as I mentioned, you know, it's not an effective way to do business to have to be reactive, and we all have to deal with breakdowns and emergency repairs anyway, but if you're not keeping up with your scheduled maintenance, there's a chance that that happens a lot more. And over the few years we've really gotten into this in MDOT, spent a lot of time explaining this to the region engineers and the operations folks, because if you can explain to them the impact of that underbridge inspection unit going out on the job, and you know what, it breaks down and you've got this bridge repair you've got to do, is what's the cost of that? And they want to know what that is in dollars, and it's often hard to quantify that for them, but you know, it's lost work time with the workers out there, there's a safety issue with the public, there's a cost of getting the unit out there and getting it back, and you know, we just don't want to be, as all you know, I'm preaching to the choir, be in a reactive mode to dealing with emergencies. We'd rather be proactive with what we're doing. It also helps managers more efficiently schedule their preventive maintenance, and that's very important. So the team really felt like that was a good one to pursue. We talked about pursuing an additional measurement, but we thought maybe just start off with one extra one would be a good way to go first time around. So Scott, if you want to pass that out. He's going to pass you a copy of the issue paper, which you can keep. It's if I didn't have this in PDF, I could click on this and show it to you on the screen. But basically, for those that were around when we did the first 4 metrics, we put together what's called an issue paper, which is basically a definition of the measurement, a brief analysis of the measurement, and some pros and cons of the measurement, and then some recommendations about what those parameters would include. And as you get a chance to review it, as I go through the rest of the presentation, maybe at the end we can spend a little time talking about it. But as I mentioned earlier, what we would be doing then is to really endorse and provide some rationale and some support for the measurement. We would put an issue paper together, which I think last time we did these, we drafted them up in MDOT. I think Earl Potter helped us with them. And what's embedded in this slide is basically, it goes through the 4 measurements and gives a brief definition. And it's one of those old constitutional things that says whereas, where thou, and thou art, and all that. And about how important it is. So we would do a similar one for this measurement if we move ahead with it. And these measurements, as Tim alluded to in his initial briefing, as part of our charter, it's also in support of these projects, 20-24, it's in support of MAP 21, even though fleet metrics aren't specifically addressed. And as you all know, that in any organization or job you're in, you need to have goals and objectives. And by having measurements, it allows you to better take care of the needs of your taxpayers and take care of your fleet and keep it a healthy fleet. So please take time to review that, and then we can talk about it as need be. But I think the team did a good job putting that together, and it seems like a kind of a slam dunk to me, unless people have other good ideas, because there's always going to be an opportunity to add other measurements at another time. This isn't like the end of the line for us. So that's kind of what we spent the last year doing. I think we met 4 or 5 times to go over this and work through this and get consensus from the representatives from each of the regions. And I know Ken sent it out to the Northeast at some point in time and asked everybody to look at it. I sent out the Midwest, and I know the West region said they shared it, and I believe the Southeast told me they did the same thing. And we got some feedback for some additional items that I can point out when we get around to discussing that. But I think it's a good start. So to kind of take a turn here, talk a little bit about M5 Fleet System webinars. That was an action item we had from the 2014 conference. We used to kind of share those, get everybody together to talk about best practices and collaborate on what we're doing with the fleet management system, what kind of reports we're doing, and information we can share. And it's really probably one of the best webinars we have, because it gets the people that are using and working on the fleet management system on the conference call to talk about issues, problems, and the people that have been out there a while can share what they're doing and their thoughts. And typically we've ranged, we've had, I think on the last call there at the bottom, it says we had 9 states on the call, which I think is pretty good, and usually there's multiple people from a state on the call. So we've had, over the last couple of years, we've had 7 webinars. We try to do them quarterly. It doesn't always work out that way. Usually it falls back to semi-annually, but it's always always a good exchange of information. This next slide's pretty long and busy, but this is just an example of some of the things at the conference call we've talked about. From meters, dashboards, custom reports, annual inventories, interfaces for M5 with other systems, tracking rental equipment, standardization of PM intervals, job codes, mobile apps. You can just go on. And we've published minutes for those meetings, so people that participated in them will get copies of those minutes as well. And this is just a short listing of some of the things we've talked about. What we hope to do on our next conference call, which I'll kind of touch on it later, is we're going to start including a couple of the vendors, because that was kind of one of our discussions at one of our last meetings. It'd be nice if the fleet management system vendors would develop the ability to report these metrics more easily for us, because a lot of the canned reports they offer aren't exactly what we might need as fleet managers or our customers. And so we had a conference call with Asset Works, and they've agreed to, they're interested in participating. And I know Rick Durham in Kentucky, they're using Agile Assets, and they've worked real closely with Agile Assets to create some of these reports. We're fortunate in MDOT. Andy Banish, who does our systems, a computer science major, so he can write computer code and he can figure out how to do this stuff. Not everybody has that luxury, and that makes it a lot easier. We use business objects now. We used to use Crystal reports, but we've shared our old Crystal reports with other states, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can send you the reports, and Andy can work with you to help you run that data. So if the work's already done, maybe if you got M5, it'll help you do that stuff. Now, this isn't a commercial for M5. It just so happens that's what we what we ended up with, but it's worked well for us, and a lot of it is due to what Andy's done for us, and it's good. It's not just the system. So that kind of dovetails into MDOT assistance we've offered at the national meeting in 2014 and last year. We're willing to provide assistance to folks as need be. From that second bullet there, you can see that we've helped, not to be braggadocious there, but we've helped 7 or 8 states, and quite a few of those are reporting something in some manner, and so we're more than willing to do that. We can do webinars to help you with that, conference calls, whatever. You can call Andy anytime except the next 3 weeks, because I think right now his wife is being induced for a baby, so he's not going to be available for a while, for a couple weeks. But anyway, that's worked out well, and I think the collaboration and understanding what other people are doing has been really, really helpful to keeping this process going. So we're here to help, as the old IG inspectors would say, David. We're here to help you, not make life hard for you. So now we're going to turn to region reporting status. This is just an update for you. It's not meant to poke a sharp stick in your eye or anything. Our goal from 2014 to 2016, like I said before, we had 17 states reporting in 2014. Our goal was to double that by 2016, which was to get to 34 states. It was pretty aggressive. I think we ended up last year, we were sitting at 28. So now we're at 30. So we've improved like 34%, that's good. 10 of the states are reporting all 4 measurements, as you can see there. 11 states are reporting 3, and so forth and so on. We've have half of the states have reported in the last 12 months. We do have states that reported initially that, as you know, people, there's changeover and stuff, and they kind of drop off the map or whatever. But so we still have the goal of 34 states and more. The best we can do with that. 55% of the Northeast states are reporting, 62% of the Midwest, 54% of the Southeast, and almost 70% of the Western states. So they're doing a very good job. Every year, or more frequent than that, you get a love note from me asking me how you're doing if you're not reporting. I've got a few responses back this year. We do have the other half of the states that haven't reported, that are reporting, that haven't reported in more than 12 months. But at least 10 states have come back and either told me they're close to reporting, are going to report, or they're working through a few bugs. But then we haven't heard from some other states. There are people who don't have fleet management systems. They're trying to work through that. People spend a lot of time trying to map the NAFA codes. Depending on who you talk to, for some people that's more complicated than others, but it doesn't have to be exact. It's just a way of kind of baselining by everybody using a standard coding system. What's a light fleet vehicle? What's a GVW, light fleet vehicle? So all your vehicles in that category are there. What's a medium vehicle? What's a rolling stock? What's non-rolling stock? All that type of thing. And then we have fleet manager turnover. As I contact people, this is a good way for me to keep in contact with folks. I'm finding out all the time, Jim's retiring soon. We got other folks that are switching out. Bernie out of Wyoming, he recently retired. 2 of the Virginia guys retired. So it's a good way to keep up with who's out there and everything. But the turnover, day to day we're pretty busy, and we're putting out a lot of fires and dealing with a lot of different things. And particularly if you're a new person coming on board, this is probably the last thing you want thrown in your lap, because you're trying to survive and get by. So I understand that, because I've been there. So anyway, I think we've made, when you look back, okay, I said this process started with a meeting in 2010, but we didn't get a website up till 13. We didn't have the first reporting till the year later in 14, so I think we made pretty good progress. But we want to keep pushing this because it's an important thing. There is a website. I hope everybody knows where that is. It's at emtsp.org. And on the right side, there's some stoplights and performance measures, and you click on that, and you can go in there, and it has an information and form section, which is where you can get the form to report. It's got a contact section. It's got a benchmarking comparison. It's got a lot of other data in there. And then below that, it's got the regions and the states. And if a state's listed, you click on that link. That means they've reported. You can go in that and see all their stoplights, and at the bottom of that, there's a link for supporting documentation, where if there's data of any kind you want to share with people, you can put it in there. We don't have direct access to that. There's a couple of contacts at NCPP that update that for us. And when you send your form in, I always encourage, it should populate, if your email lets you do that, it should populate their office and should populate copying me, so I can poke them if they haven't gotten around to posting it yet, because I always ask them to let me know that. So it's a good website. They did a fantastic job putting that together, and it's a good way to have visibility on what we're doing. So this is also on the website. This is an eye test for, we put a contacts list together for performance metrics so we know who to contact. And a lot of these people are the fleet managers or somebody else that's been designated by the state. So this is just what it looks like. And it seems like every time I put it on the slide, it's outdated because there's always so many changes going on. This is just the second page to show you what it looks like. These links, the ones that are highlighted in blue to the far left, if you click on that link from the web page, it'll take you to that state's web page. And then when you click back, it'll bounce you back and forth. And I think that was John White out of South Carolina. It says, why don't we make this easier so I don't have to look at this and then get out of this to go to something else. So anytime you have ideas for the website, we can do that. We also got Saskatchewan that reports part of a metric too, and they've participated. So that's good. So I'm glad it's useful. And the email will automatically, if you click on the email address, it should pop up and you can send that person an email too. So this says reporting requirements, and after talking to people, I think I need to change that word requirements to say guidelines, because you can report anytime. When we started this, we just had to pick a couple of time frames so people knew what was a good, to have a target of what was a good time to report. So we basically, the 10th of January, 10th of July, that's like every 6 months. And you can report in April, May, June, August, September, October, whenever you want to report, it'll get posted. We just want to target. I was talking to Jim yesterday, and I'd forgotten to send out my reminder, so a lot of you may have gotten that in your email box this morning about, don't forget, reporting time's coming up. So these were just kind of some guidelines we put together to help folks out. And like I said, it's okay to report incremental progress. You don't have to have all 4 measurements done. You don't have to have one measurement done. You can have part of one measurement done. Or you can be like at least one state that sent in a form and said, hey, Scott, we're working on this, and we'll report soon. So they're listed on the web page, but there's no data there. But, we give them credit for letting us know that. And that form's embedded in there, but you can find it on the website. You can find it on the website as well. So why is it important to report? Well, for a lot of the things I've already mentioned, benchmarking and collaboration, it's been huge for conferences like this. I mean, I would have never gotten to know the number of people I know and network with them and talk to them if I hadn't been involved in this process. And you get to know a lot of other folks, and it's always good to come to these conferences because then you can put a face with a name. So it's very, very important. MAP 21, yes, fleet metrics are not part of that, but what we do in fleet makes a difference in terms of roads and bridges. I was telling Jim last night, it's kind of like the offensive linemen in football, those star players in the backfield and the wide receivers and stuff get all the glory, but you know what, that glory doesn't come if those people aren't clearing the way up front. And that's what we do in fleet. We provide them the equipment and vehicles and the resources they need to fix the roads and bridges. So it's very important. And I'll touch on a little bit later, I did have a discussion with some MAP 21 folks, but I think what we do is extremely important, and these measurements help bring that out if you talk to your executive management. It's worked in MDOT. So this kind of goes into that. What are the DOT benefits? And this just isn't Michigan here. This is feedback I've gotten from other states. But I can speak for Michigan. When I came on board, and we just got in the fleet management system, and then Andy was on board actually before I was. There wasn't a lot of visibility upper management level, of fleet and what was important and what we need to purchase and how old it was and all that. And that's helped us get there. So most of our region engineers now are very familiar. I'll send a lot of the reports to my boss, Sonia, who a lot of you have met, and she'll forward it on to the region engineers, and some of them are very involved in this, and there's an equipment foreman in each of those 7 regions I mentioned to you earlier. And they are down there talking to their equipment foreman, and we have spring and winter vehicle inspections where we go out to be sure the vehicles and equipment are ready. And they're out there looking at the vehicles, and they're out there, so their maintenance workers and all that see them out there and know that they care about it. And that makes a lot of difference. If you're, it's like the old saying is, if your boss is paying attention to it, guess what? Everybody else is going to pay attention to it because they don't want to be caught, with their pants down, so to speak, and not know the answer. So it's very important. Improvement in PM compliance. Several states have had huge improvements when they start tracking it because people are paying attention now. When we started the PM metric, our state has reported 47% PM compliance. Now, a lot of that was maybe people weren't documenting it or doing it or whatever, and now we're well over 90% because people pay attention now. Andy sends out weekly reports to the garage supervisors. They get automated reports through M5, and it shows them what's overdue. So nobody has an excuse for not knowing what's due in inspection. And that's something we can help folks with. High visibility for funding replacement items. We probably average $5 or $6 million a year in equipment replacement, but last year we got 12 million. Previous year we got 9 million. This year we're going to get 9 million probably. In 2010 we got $350,000. That won't buy you a squat. So it was all up and down, but now we're starting to get consistent, and a lot of it is driven by this. And Scott and Dave in our garage and Andy, they put the data together to go forward to executive management so they can rack and stack all the priorities. They're the ones that make the decisions. Unfortunately, we put the data together. We don't really make the decisions. We make the recommendations, say you should buy this, this, and this. And for the most part, they do that. But we've got a lot of years of catching up, even at $9 million a year, to do that, because we don't have our own fleet budget per se. It's all comes out of MDOT's maintenance budget. So that money's shared for roads and bridges and a lot of other activities, but at least we're getting some attention now. Improved ability to report seasonal impacts. What does that mean? Well, I can tell you, a year and a half ago when we were going through a bad winter, just as I figured it would happen, out of the director's mouth is, how many winter maintenance trucks do we have ready to go? And in the past, because we're so decentralized, nobody could give that answer. Well, we can give it based on what's in the system. Is that right? Yeah, maybe not completely right, but we can answer those questions now. We can tell them what's down and what's not down, and we couldn't do that before. So that's pretty important for organizations to know what their status is. Guys in the military and folks in the room that were in the military before know that the commanding officer needs to know what the status of his troops are, needs to know what the status of his aircraft are, needs to know the status of what his ships are or his equipment are, because he's got to report that all the way up to the Pentagon so the National Command Authority knows, is this unit combat ready? And so it's the same type of theory. Pertinent fleet reductions, assignments, this has made a difference in us reducing a lot of our fleet. Is it as good as we want to see it? No, because we still pester people to death about, hey, you're not driving this vehicle enough or anything, but we have gotten fleet reductions out of this. In some cases, I think the light fleet probably has gone down about 10%. Some of the other areas have not moved that much, but we are getting people's attention now. I mean, there's plenty of equipment we're not using as much. Now there's some things we quote unquote call our fire trucks or our ambulances. You need them when you need them, because nobody's going to be around at 3 a.m. to wrench or something. So there's things like that you have to have. But yeah, you don't, it's not unusual that I get a lot of my information out of the Lansing State Journal when I wake up in the morning that says such and such a department's being investigated or something's going on or whatever. And that's why we really want GPS AVL on all our vehicles and equipment. There's some sensitivities to that. I don't really know why. A lot of the citizens are surprised because I'm the focal point for if any citizen has a vehicle complaint on an MDOT vehicle, they call me. And that's not a fun thing to deal with, people that are unhappy. And they're surprised to find out that, I can't tell them was that vehicle where they tell me that it was. If it's a winter maintenance truck, I can, because we have that on all those, but it would be nice to have it out there. Because we also migrate for winter maintenance trucks, we migrate fuel data over, we migrate the miles and the engine hours over. So it's a huge update for our fleet management system to be able to have real-time data, which we don't have. Somebody's got to go out and check the meter on a pickup truck, or it goes into the garage for service and somebody's got to write it down. It's great to have that data available. But yeah, it's that's important. So it's paid benefits, but we could reduce a lot more in our areas. I'm sure you guys and girls would like to do the same thing. Be a better use of resources and taxpayer dollars. And it is huge for improved network and sharing, like I said. I mean, great opportunity, because a lot of stuff we are talking about at these meetings all the time are the same things we're dealing with and have headaches with every day. And it's good to be in a therapy session with your peers to discuss these things. So I'm going to transfer to Brad here for a few minutes. He so graciously agreed to give a brief testimonial on performance metrics and what it's done for South Dakota DOT. And Brad will speak for a bit of time here, and then I'll wrap up.
You know, last year at the meeting, you know, I sat down and talked to Scott a little bit about this, you know, and you know, I know Scott gets up and gives us a update every year, and we appreciate it, you know, but it's like I told him, I said, it might not hurt to hear from somebody that's actually utilizing this a little bit, or talk a little bit about, you know, somebody that's used this system since we put it together. You know, what happened to us is here about 2 years ago, our executive team, you know, come to me and they wanted to start implementing some equipment stuff into our strategic plan for the department. You know, but they wanted something that they could track very well and be able to compare, you know, what we were doing. You know, and then on a curve they threw in there, it'd really be nice to be able to track it against other states too. You know, and of course the first thing I started thinking about, you know, was the PM stuff that we'd been working on. You know, because I knew what was out on the website, you know, that there were states reporting and stuff like that. So, you know, I basically went to our executive team, you know, and that's what I presented to them is, you know, it'd be really good to, you know, start tracking our PMs. You know, here's all the tools that we have in place to track this, you know, and it's through the EMTSP website and with everybody reporting and everything. You know, one thing that that did for our group, the MTSP group, is at that moment, our executive team really started buying into what we are doing as a group. You know, it brought it to their attention, and they started seeing a lot of value in us meeting and doing this stuff, which, you know, it's really made things a lot easier now, you know, whether it's for the contribution to the group or for the travel and stuff, you know, because they know that there's merit in what we're doing. So, you know, but what we did is we basically implemented it in July 2015. You know, and where we started there when we first did it, you know, we started out at 88.3% of our minor PMs compliant, and 84.85% of our major PMs were compliant. You know, for that first year, it became a really big competition within the regions and the areas within our state. We actually ended in June 2016 at 93.4% of our minors being compliant and 90.99% of our majors being compliant. And this is just kind of, you can't see it very well, but this is kind of a chart, you know, that where we tracked everything for, you know, for at least the last 2 years. We did it in FY17, and then we tracked it all the way through this year. You know, but you can see where we started kind of in the yellow and the red at the bottom left-hand corner of the screen there on that bottom line, you know, and just kind of, you know, it got better and better as, you know, the first year, and then into the second year, you know, winter kind of they lapsed off, but once we got through winter, it took off again. but there's a lot of accountability that we have on our guys now when you start actually sending this out and presenting it to them, but on the executive team side, what they like about it, when they do their presentations and stuff, is they can take our numbers and compare them against everybody else too, to see where we're at or how we're doing as a state compared to everybody else. So, so it's really worked good for us. When we took this on, the next thing that we're actually looking at now is the utilization part of it. It's a little tricky, because the metric that we have set on the website, is one way, but depending on what you use for systems, it's a little tricky how you can do things or track things depending on what you use. But it's like Scott said, even if you do have a homegrown system, there's still ways that you can utilize what you have to get some numbers out of it, one way or the other. We ended up, I think, just through evaluations and stuff, we're looking at probably, we kind of shot for a 10% reduction in our fleet this year, just and I think right now with the numbers we had looking at going into the fall sales, it's going to be about an 8%. But it ain't always the number that you're hitting. The number isn't always the goal. It's going through the processes to try to get there is what the big thing is. So, but I just kind of wanted to share with everybody, that, I like I said, we've heard from Scott every year and but it did make a difference in South Dakota 2 years ago when we had to sit down with our executive team, having something in place already from this group, really helped us out to be able to move along, plus it, just moving our group forward with the state of South Dakota, it helped drastically by doing steps like this too.
So we got several ongoing efforts, and this looks a lot like last year. We're still continuing to strive to get the 34 states. Obviously, it'd be great to have 50 at some point, but we still want to make our original goal. We still want to report. We still plan to ask people to report. You can report as frequently as you want, or at least semi-annually. We're going to continue to do the periodic webinars with either, we've done them with whole groups, we've done them with selected groups, but we'll continue those. MDOT's still willing to help other states in any way they need to be assisted to help with reporting. Just as Brad just did a minute ago, encourage state DOTs to share good news stories. And in this time of stretched resources and minimal dollars and all that, I think things like performance measurements are going to play even a bigger role, because those executives are going to want justification for why they're spending money on stuff. And we're always looking for ways to enhance the website, so if you have ideas to do that, that's good as well. The key takeaway, in my opinion, on this slide is there's two measurements out there that we currently use that I would think as fleet managers we all should know the answer to this question. These two questions is, how old is our fleet, and how well are we keeping up with PM inspections? So if you know those answers, then you ought to be able to report something on the webpage and report how you're doing. Even if it's not the whole metric, all 5 groups or whatever, maybe you just report the overall PM rate, or maybe you just report the age of a particular group. But we all, I'm pretty sure, would know how old our fleet is in some general regard. 50% is past retention, or 60%, or maybe if you're like Alabama was, I think they were maybe 100% compliant because they were refurbing their vehicles every 5 years and selling them. So those type of things, the other two metrics are a little trickier. Like Brad said, with utilization, that's tricky, and availability is even trickier. But PM compliance and age of our fleet is, those are kind of like, that's like Fleet 101 type stuff that we ought to know. So. Suggested next steps or future goals. Like I said, we're going to continue to report and identify future metrics because we want to keep this growing and maybe have something that will help other folks. This isn't to make it more difficult by giving you more to report, but let's identify things that are important to us in the fleet arena. You know, this was originally a project to get a contractor to do, and at the in Kansas City in 2011, we talked about it out there, and I think Jim Smith stood up and looked around and says, aren't we smart enough to do this? I mean, look at all the years experience we have in this room. Why can't we as a group do this? So we signed on to do that. And we are smart enough. We don't need to pay somebody a couple $100,000 to do a study. Now maybe there might be some benefit at some point to get some evaluation from a contractor of what we could do better. But I know our time's critical, and most of us have small offices. Some offices are 1 or 2 people. Maybe some people have a lot more folks, 10 or 12. But it is something important we do, because right now it's our livelihood. It's how we make our money, hopefully get health care, take care of our families, and hopefully it's something we enjoy doing. So very important. We've engaged our executive management. I would encourage you to do the same. It may help you get some more money or more funding to do stuff. It may get you a lot more questions that you don't want to have to answer, but you know, sometimes there's pain that comes along with the profit you get out of it. So do that. Encourage fleet management system vendors to develop interfaces and modules for metrics reporting, as I mentioned earlier. We've done that with AssetWorks a little bit. We're going to have them hopefully on the call in September to take a look at that. I'm sure there's a cost, obviously, to do something like that, but it would seem to me if you're like Iowa or like Kansas or some states that are upgrading their fleet management system, wouldn't it be great to buy a fleet management system that would already at least spit out the metrics for you, or at least do something to where you could manipulate it to where it could give you the data that you needed? I think that'd be great, not having to do it from scratch. MAP 21, we've talked about trying to align our effort more with what they've required with road and bridge community and stuff. I have had at least an initial conversation with them, and I shouldn't have been surprised, but they didn't even know there were fleet metrics out there, so I had to explain it to them and talk to them a little bit about it. And there is somewhat a pushback from executive management about reporting too much information. But I'll have other conversations with them. And it's not to make it necessarily mandatory, but get visibility. But I mean, you know, they told me, well, there's no fleet metrics out there. And I said, yeah, there are. And they wanted to argue with me about it. So I kind of had to chuckle and say, okay, you can argue with me, but here's a web link. Look at it and tell me what you see here. But I think if we got their support, even if it wasn't mandatory, that might help bring more visibility to it. Talked about establishing a national metrics committee for long-term goals. I don't know that will happen anytime soon, but something to do. And I'm always open to recommendations of other ideas as well. So any resources we can use to advance this effort and help folks, because I will tell you in the long run it will help you. It might be painful getting there, might be a little bit more work, but it will help what your department and what you're trying to do.
First off, on the subcommittee on maintenance resolution, I assume you're targeting not this coming in Rhode Island, but the next one after the regions.
Correct. I've actually I've actually drafted one, kind of getting ahead of myself before everybody says, yeah, it's okay, but yeah, not the one coming up. It'd be the next one.
I'm curious on PMs if anybody in the room is using onboard vehicle oil change monitoring or whatever. You know, you can all reset it and have it tell you when your next oil change should be, or have it go. But to me, it's kind of hard to track when you're in compliance, you know,
right.
Regular schedule. So is anybody using that, and are they using that in your metrics somehow?
It's funny you mention that. No, we're not using it. Yes, we have people that want to use it. Yeah. And we just had our quarterly meeting with our equipment foreman, and it was very rarely do we get them to be unanimous in the room. And they were all unanimous as, no, we don't want to do that, because that means we have to ensure that the driver's doing what they're supposed to do. Because a lot of them aren't getting their oil changed or getting their A service done now when they need to get it done. How are we going to trust that they're going to get it done when the meter starts flashing at them or whatever? And we're not there yet on that. We've done a pilot some years ago, and that didn't really prove much. And I don't know, maybe other people have found that effective, but the thing is, everybody operates them differently. Yeah. And so if you're using a vehicle that you're going to idle more than you're going to drive miles, you're going to have more engine hours or whatever, because a lot of our PMs for our sedans and minivans, they're based upon mileage. Everything else is based upon engine hours for us. So
So
it's
the
like,
industry is really looking at those extended
Right.
service
Mhm.
intervals. You know, we heard from
Right.
Detroit about 35,000 miles, or
Mhm.
100,000 hours, or whatever
Right.
it was.
Hugely unrealistic.
Right.
Yeah.
You
Right.
will be
Right.
buying new equipment if you follow it.
Right.
That is.
all our intervals in MDOT are based upon the OEM recommendation. So if they recommend,
Specific.
yeah, ours are specific based upon the OEM recommendation. We've periodically over the years convened our little groups together and looked at them and say, but most of our folks, I mean, we had a big discussion on oil changes on international winter maintenance trucks. What's severe duty, what's not severe duty, and you know, international will tell you, I think it's every 6 months, I forgot what the number is, every 6 months, every 400 hours, I think. And so we do ours every, I think, 350 hours, but annually, because we don't qualify as a severe duty environment or type of truck. So, so we actually got to the point to where we were taking oil samples for international to evaluate to see if they would be willing, from their standpoint, to change it. But then, okay, you're running a Cummins engine. What kind? Then we'd have to get with Cummins and all that. And because we had somebody that, you know, this innovation thing in MDOT, that's been one of the big words, and we have a lot of people coming up with innovations, and they're just kind of running wild regardless of what the rules are to get their innovation out there. And we had a garage that said they took oil samples, and they said that they think the interval could go to 500 hours. And so we did analysis on that, and the amount of trucks we would even be looking at in a year reduced by like 30 or 40%. Because our goal is we want to look at every truck or piece of equipment at least once a year. If it's a commercial motor vehicle inspection or A service, it needs to be looked at by somebody. Extending the interval isn't going to help it, because it's more than oil changes. When we take vehicles in for service, people think, okay, it's like your car at home. It's an oil change, rotate the tires, and you're good to go. Well, they find a lot of stuff sometimes on an A service, and if it's going a year and a half or 400 hours or something, you're going to be missing, excuse me, a lot of stuff. So long answer to your question, I don't know if anybody else is doing it, but we have somebody that wants to pilot it, and I just told him to go back, and if we're going to do a pilot, we're going to have to really manage that closely, and people are going to have to document exactly what they're doing to be sure we're confident of that. But I don't know how we would manage it statewide. I do it on my own personal car, because the funny thing is, though, you know, so the 3,000 miles, because they still put the sticker in the window. They put synthetic oil in my car. Oh, that'll last longer. Okay, so I do that, and then I do the meter, and so it may go 6,000 or 7,000 miles before I do it. But then when I get done with an oil change, they put a sticker in there and say, come back in 3,000 miles, because they want me to spend money.
Did you guys have a discussion about the definition of scheduled versus unscheduled, and what is really scheduled and what is, I assume there's got to be some debate amongst all of us of what is really a scheduled repair.
Right. If you note, I don't know if you read on the back page, there's a couple things that were brought up by people. 2 items were brought up. Okay, vehicle accidents. We can't control vehicle accidents, so if a deer hits it, you know, what is that going to be? You know, in my mind, that's unscheduled maintenance. But I said, okay, if you don't want to include that in your reporting, that's fine. The other thing is upfitting or new build-up on a truck. You know, we wouldn't consider that scheduled per se. So to us, scheduled maintenance is like a commercial motor vehicle inspection, an A service, what we consider an oil change and a tire rotation, a B service, or some other inspection. Unscheduled is anything road breakdown.
So
or
if
whatever.
an inspection finds that you've got something that needs to come in for repair, but it's not something that would take the truck down or the vehicle down, you can actually schedule it in in a couple of weeks.
Right.
Is that unscheduled or is that scheduled?
Well, that would typically be, if you find it during the inspection, we used to code it as corrective. I think now we're coding a lot of that as preventive, because we're finding it when it's in there.
Systems in your maintenance system, like the one I use, that is, and by Maryland law, because it's all part of the preventive maintenance program by Maryland law is a little bit different. If I'm doing a PM and say they do the inspection, they say it needs brakes or needs tires, I generate a corrective off of that PM. That PM is the originator
Right.
document, and there's actually a hierarchy, a chain of all
That's
these
true.
work orders that
Yeah.
come off of. So that's actually part of the PM itself.
Right.
Even if I come back, you know, we can't do it today. If it's like a type 2 correction, which would be,
Right.
you can operate it, but it needs to be addressed soon.
Right.
It's not a type 1 correction where it's,
Right.
you're not driving this until we fix it.
Right.
Okay? It's been scheduled. You will come back, or it'll
Right.
sit here till we get to it. All right, so,
Right.
yeah.
Yep, we do that. We do that. We order parts and they go back out and use the
You
truck.
schedule it.
Yeah.
It's part of that paradigm, it's part of that actual hierarchy, so you can trace it. It's in the paper trail saying it generated off of an inspection, so you've scheduled it. Okay, I know what you're saying about the unscheduled, is
Yeah.
like, it comes back in on a hook, or you've got to go out there and make it run.
Right.
Even
It is.
if generated, I mean, even if it's a repair of something that should have been caught, you shouldn't be out there operating the vehicle, it takes that vehicle down immediately, but you find it through an inspection, is that then a scheduled or unscheduled? You know, to me, that's unscheduled, that's something.
Yeah, that's- I would-
You get caught.
Right.
If you missed it, yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know,
Somebody didn't report it, but should have reported it, or
Right.
it's a piece of equipment that's set in a yard somewhere.
right.
That,
It is critical with this particular measurement about how you're coding stuff, and you have to train your mechanics of what your expectation is in terms of how it should be coded. Another thing too is it's just not, you know, the percentage of scheduled versus unscheduled. It's more than just about the numbers. What it'll allow you to identify too is your inspection checklist thorough enough that you are inspecting everything you want to be looked at when it's in there for an
I
inspection.
really like that measurement,
So-
I think it's a good measurement.
And it's kind of a leading indicator because you should do it. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out on that sheet, the criteria on the back where we said 70% scheduled versus 30% unscheduled, we didn't just draw that number out of the air. If you've heard of the American Public Works Association, that's kind of their rule of thumb, if you will, that I've seen published. I think Scott went out and looked on the internet. We really didn't find a whole lot, but they basically said is if you're running something like 70% of your work is scheduled versus 30%, that's good. Now, we're not close to that in MDOT. We're probably more half and half, but I think, you know, it is a way to evaluate the effectiveness of your PM inspections. And then, of course, if people are coding them wrong, you know, from the get-go, anything you're putting in the system, if it's coded incorrectly or if it's not in there, it's, you know, it's going to skew the data. So we told people on the new buildup and the accidents, if you don't want to include those, that's fine. I mean, I understand if a deer runs, and we get a lot of deer incidents, and people don't want to take that ding against them. But in the big scheme of things, if it's, you know, you're 10 or 12 a year, it shouldn't really skew the number that far.
Are all of your PMs done by shop personnel?
No. We do, when we briefed Dennis and the folks that came in, probably about 70% of our work statewide is in-house and 30% is out. So, but that's not just PM inspections that's out, that's corrective maintenance and all that, but we.
Our oil changes are done by our equipment operators, they're not brought into a shop.
Well, that's true. A lot of our equipment operators do those, as well as and that's kind of a sore point with some of the mechanics because the operators, that's hit and miss. But we do, some of the vehicles get taken out. You know, if people are traveling around the state doing work and they have an oil change, they'll take it into, let's say, Jiffy Lube or somewhere else and get it done. But then they don't get some of the other stuff looked at because Jiffy Lube will change your oil and filter and boom, you'll go. So we always say try to bring it back in. But the big thing, documentation in every organization I've ever worked in has always been an issue. And so we try not to make it an issue by training people, and we don't use that as an excuse. You've heard garbage in, garbage out. We say garbage in, gospel out.
Yeah.
I had a boss that used to say that. Garbage in, gospel out. I'm going to use that to take that to executive management and talk to them, and that's the number. It's not the number you think it is. It's the number that I can show him or her out of the system. So that's the way we handle it. And we don't get those complaints anymore. The data must be wrong because they know we won't entertain that discussion because they need to document stuff. So
When your operators are doing that, are they following your foreman so that they can put it into the system as completed?
We have a method to do that, yeah. But, you know, if you're gonna use that as a measurement of how well the shop's performing,
Right.
you have to kind of be careful about that. But if you use it as a measurement of your fleet health, you know, then that's something different.
the drivers in our department are supposed to bring the invoice back, and they have their administrator or their M5 point of contact is supposed to enter it into M5. So that sometimes there's a lag time between the driver getting back and forgetting to hand the invoice. So we may send a report out that says this service is overdue. No, we just had it done. Well, put the data in, you know. So they have to get that invoice and do. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Documented in every vehicle too, where they actually write down, you know, the oil changes.
Okay.
and the-
Yeah.
But that's not in the system. You have to go out in the glove box and do it.
I do have a question for everybody else. Does anybody really have heartburn with that new measurement? I know I've kind of put you on the spot by handing it to you and asking you to look at it, but would everybody be okay from the Northeast and Midwest perspective of moving ahead with that? Yay? Everybody? Yay? Nay? No nays? Okay, well, we'll move ahead with that and we'll work on the,
Definition would be good, or at least some discussion about it, so that we
So,
feel like
okay.
we're all kind of on the same page. Because that's one where the number is the number, and I could relate directly to you and everybody else.
right,
It's not really, you know, all the other measurements, you're measuring against your own benchmark, you know. How well are you doing against what your policy is? In this case, it's a ratio of scheduled versus
Right,
unscheduled. You don't
right,
say
right.
it's
Yeah, we can work on that. I'll talk to Andy about
just a
that.
good
too.
definition. I think it would be it'd help all of us too. It may not, some of us may disagree with your definition. It may not change what happens in your state, but
Right. Well, it may be, you know, the other thing too is it'll probably be hard to identify each circumstance because we got people that what if us to death. Well, what about this? What about that? What about this? And we can't address everything. But I think if you look at it from the standpoint of is it an unplanned or breakdown that was not identified as part of a PM or whatever, then it takes it out of service or whatever. It needs to be considered unscheduled.
The end, from the get-go, it's always pretty much been, even if there's difference from Kansas to Connecticut, even for that new one, it's really how you base your, if you feel your operation out of service means this, well, that's what it means.
Right.
I think they're all gonna be close, but to have something where every state is exactly the same, I don't think will ever happen because your definition might be something different from there.
Well, I mean, I agree with what Tim said. Maybe we need to define it a little more, but it would be different. There would, you know, there's going to always be some differences because your policy may drive that, your inspection criteria may drive that, and you know, if you know, you're probably going to find on any inspection some little nitnoy stuff that needs to be fixed. But am I going to really worry about that? Or I'm looking for the stuff that's going to take this out of service and keep us from getting a job done, and that's that.
I guess it's possible that if my goal is the 70%, 30% or whatever, and I exceed the 70%, I would have a green light on my. However, I still have the same percentage, you know, and my green light might be a yellow light or a red light somewhere else. But
Right.
it's still a percentage, and it's,
Right.
you could say, I'm 70, he's 72, he's 74. And supposedly, it's the same thing. You can correct the benchmark. but
Right,
not-
right. And what we've always talked about too is the, you know, the green light, yellow light, red light isn't meant to be a dig at anybody. But if somebody's really doing well on something, and maybe you're not doing as well, then what I've found it's helpful is call that person or email them and say, hey, I see you're really doing pretty good at this. What are you guys doing? Or girls doing, you know, to make this better? So that's helpful. But yeah, we probably do need to tweak the wording a little bit on that, just so it's a little clearer. Any other questions? There's my contact information. If you don't know how to get a hold of me already, there it is. Okay, well, if nobody has anything else, I'm done with that.